John Carter, a proud Republican man known for wearing his signature MAGA hat, was enjoying a quiet afternoon outside his home in a suburban neighborhood. He had just stepped out to inspect a package left on his driveway when a neighbor, Mrs. Thompson, began yelling from across the street. "Hey, what are you doing there? This is a respectable neighborhood," she shouted, glaring at John as if he didn't belong. Startled but calm, John responded, "Just grabbing my package, Mrs. Thompson." "Is that a problem?" Her eyes darted to his hat, and she waved her hand dismissively. He waved her hand dismissively. "You and your hat are causing a scene. I'm calling the police." Unfazed, John shook his head, muttering, "Unbelievable." Minutes later, Officer Karen Daniels arrived, her patrol car pulling up with authority. Karen, known in the precinct for her assertiveness, approached John with her hand resting on her belt, already suspicious of the man standing in his driveway. "Excuse me, sir," she began curtly. "What are you doing here?" "What are you doing here?" John, visibly confused, replied. "I live here. This is my home." Karen raised an eyebrow, her tone growing sharper. "Can you prove that? Let me see some ID." John sighed, pulling out his wallet, but before he could hand her his identification, she interrupted, pointing to his hat. "You know that kind of attire can provoke people. Why are you wearing it?" John's confusion turned to frustration. "I didn't realize hats were illegal," he replied dryly. Karen ignored his comment, her posture stiffening. "Sir, I'm going to need you to comply. This is for public safety." As a small group of neighbors began to gather across the street, whispering and recording the scene, John decided to film the interaction himself. Holding up his phone, he said firmly, "I'm recording this. I have the right to stand on my property without being harassed." Karen's eyes narrowed. "Put the phone down," she ordered, but John refused. "No, officer. I think I'll keep it on. Evidence is important. Evidence is important." The tension grew as Karen accused John of disturbing the peace. Despite his protests, she moved to detain him, gripping his arm as she declared, "You're under arrest." John, stunned, exclaimed, "For what? Picking up a package?" His teenage son ran out of the house shouting, "What are you doing?" "That's my dad." Karen warned the boy to stay back, but the emotional scene left the gathering neighbors shocked. Some muttered in support of John, while others whispered that Karen was just doing her job. By the time John was placed in the back of the squad car, his wife stood in the doorway, her arms around their son, her face etched with worry. As the police car drove off, a neighbor's video of the arrest began circulating online. Within hours, the footage had gone viral, igniting a national debate about free speech, political profiling, and the overreach of authority. Karen Daniels, still convinced John Carter is up to no good, takes a step closer, her voice firm. "Sir? I'm asking you again. Show me your ID and explain why you're standing here wearing that hat." John, now visibly frustrated, replies, "Officer, I've told you this is my property. I live here. What else do you need?" Karen crosses her arms, her tone growing sharper. "Your behavior is suspicious. The neighbor called us, and I'm here to ensure public safety. Now, cooperate, or I'll have to take further action." The tension between the two rises as a small group of neighbors begin to gather across the street, whispering and recording the scene on their phones. John decides to pull out his phone and start recording as well, his voice calm but tinged with disbelief. "Officer, you're harassing me in front of my own home. This is America, and I have the right to wear whatever I want without being treated like a criminal." Karen glares at the phone, her authority feeling challenged. "Put the phone down," she orders, but John doesn't budge. "No, I think I'll keep recording. I need evidence of this, just in case," he says, the words dripping with irony. At this point, the crowd murmurs grows louder, with some voices expressing support for John, while others side with Karen, calling his behavior provocative. Ignoring the onlookers, Karen moves to detain John. "You're under arrest for disturbing the peace and failing to comply with an officer's orders," she declares, grabbing his arm. John looks stunned but doesn't resist. "Disturbing the peace by standing in my own driveway?" he asks incredulously as she places him in handcuffs. His teenage son runs out from the house yelling, "What are you doing? That's my dad. He didn't do anything." Karen coldly tells the boy to stay back, but the emotional scene leaves a visible impact on the gathering neighbors, who begin questioning the officer's actions. Within minutes, John is placed in the back of the squad car, his family watching helplessly. Karen radios for backup, citing a hostile crowd, even though no one has shown aggression. As the police car pulls away, John's wife holds their son close, her face a mix of worry and anger. "This isn't over," she says quietly, already planning her next move. Meanwhile, one of the bystanders uploads their recording of the arrest to social media. And within hours, the video goes viral. The hashtags #JusticeForJohn and #MAGA explode across Twitter and TikTok, with users on both sides of the political spectrum weighing in. In the days that follow, John's arrest becomes a national story. News outlets run the footage on repeat, analyzing every detail. Conservative pundits argue that John was targeted for his political beliefs, while others defend the officer, claiming she was simply doing her job. Protests begin to form outside the local police station, with signs reading "Free John Carter" and "End Political Profiling." Karen, initially confident in her actions, starts feeling the heat as reporters camp outside the precinct and her colleagues begin to whisper about her judgment. John, now out on bail, holds a press conference on his front lawn. He stands tall, still wearing his MAGA hat, as he addresses the crowd of reporters. "This isn't just about me," he begins, his voice steady but impassioned. "This is about every American's right to express their beliefs without fear of persecution. I was arrested in front of my family, in front of my home, for wearing a hat. If that can happen to me, it can happen to anyone." The speech resonates deeply, and clips of it circulate online, gaining millions of views. Behind the scenes, John's legal team prepares a lawsuit against the police department, citing wrongful arrest in violation of his constitutional rights. As the controversy grows, Karen is called into her superior's office. The chief of police, a stern woman in her 60s, hands Karen a stack of reports from internal affairs. "You've put this department in a very tough spot, Daniels," she says, her voice sharp. Karen defends herself, arguing that John's behavior was confrontational, and she acted within her authority. The chief shakes her head, clearly unimpressed. "We're supposed to protect and serve, not escalate situations unnecessarily. You've brought us a PR nightmare, and there will be consequences." Karen leaves the meeting visibly shaken, realizing for the first time that her career may be on the line. At this point, public opinion is sharply divided. Some see Karen as a hero standing up to political extremism, while others view her as a power-hungry officer who overstepped her bounds. Meanwhile, John maintains his composure, refusing to engage in personal attacks against Karen. Instead, he focuses on the broader issues at play, becoming a symbol of resilience and free speech. As his lawsuit moves forward, rumors begin circulating in the police department that John may have connections to local government. Karen brushes off the whispers, confident that no civilian could truly threaten her position. Unbeknownst to her, however, John's connection isn't just local, it's direct. A week after his arrest, John receives a formal letter confirming his appointment as the new chief of police, a position he had been offered months prior, but had kept under wraps. The irony is almost poetic. John smiles as he reads the letter, the words, "effective immediately," standing out in bold. He knows the road ahead won't be easy, but he's ready to take the reins and ensure that no one else experiences what he went through. John's appointment as the new chief of police wasn't just an ironic twist, but a deliberate step in his broader mission to challenge the status quo and rebuild trust between law enforcement and the community. In his first days as chief, John set an ambitious agenda, focusing on accountability measures, transparency, and initiatives aimed at bridging the deep divide between officers and the public. His arrest, now a symbol of the dangers of unchecked biases, became the cornerstone of his reforms. During his first department-wide meeting, He addressed the team with measured authority. Many of you have seen the viral video, he began, his voice steady. It's not just about me, it's about what we can learn from it. We're here to serve and protect, not to judge or divide. While many officers respected his vision, there were those who resisted, murmuring quietly about his politics and doubting his leadership. Karen Daniels, grappling with the weight of her actions, remained one of his skeptics. She avoided him when possible, unsure how to reconcile her guilt with her frustration over his sudden rise to power. Her unease only deepened as John rolled out reforms, requiring mandatory bias training and de-escalation workshops, programs she was tasked with leading. At first, Karen bristled at the assignment, viewing it as a punishment. But as she began attending the workshops, something shifted. Listening to community members share their stories of being profiled and mistreated, Karen saw herself reflected in their pain. Meanwhile, John faced challenges from both within and outside the department. His reforms drew praise from community leaders, but sparked backlash from some officers and local officials who felt he was too political. Despite this, John pressed forward, understanding the importance of leading by example. He continued wearing his MAGA hat during public appearances, knowing it sparked controversy, but also symbolized his commitment to free speech and individuality. During a press conference, when asked whether the hat undermined his efforts to unify the community, John responded with calm conviction. "This hat is a part of who I am," he said, "but my actions define me. That's the message I want this department, and this community, to remember." Karen's transformation reached a pivotal moment when John invited her to join him at a town hall meeting. Reluctantly, she agreed, not knowing what to expect. As they stood before a packed room of community members, John began by recounting his own arrest, describing how the experience reinforced his belief in second chances and mutual respect. Then, he turned the floor over to Karen, surprising everyone, including her. She hesitated, the weight of the moment pressing down on her, before stepping forward. "I made a mistake," she admitted, her voice breaking slightly. "I let my assumptions cloud my judgment, and I hurt someone who didn't deserve it. But I'm here now because I want to be better, for myself, for this department, and for all of you." The audience erupted into applause, and for the first time, Karen felt a sense of relief. Over the following weeks, she threw herself into her work, mentoring younger officers and spearheading initiatives aimed at rebuilding trust within the community. John supported her efforts, frequently checking in and encouraging her to embrace her potential as a leader. Their relationship, once fraught with tension, began to evolve into a mutual respect, rooted in their shared desire for change. By the end of the section, Karen held her first press conference independently, publicly apologizing for her actions and vowing to uphold the values John had introduced to the department. The moment was both cathartic and inspiring, setting the stage for their growing partnership and the broader reforms yet to come. Months have passed since John Carter's arrest, and the police department reflects his reforms with improved morale, stronger community relations, and a renewed sense of purpose. Yet, beneath the progress, an unresolved tension lingers between John and Officer Karen Daniels. Their shared history remains unspoken, casting a shadow over their professional interactions. During a departmental training session on implicit bias, John addresses the officers with candidness. "The badge doesn't harass our flaws. It shines a light on them. Recognizing and overcoming those flaws is what separates good officers from great ones," he says, his gaze briefly meeting Karen's. She shifts in her seat but remains attentive, sensing the weight of his words. Later that day, Karen decides to confront their past. She steps into John's office hesitantly, her voice steady but tinged with vulnerability. "Chief, I need to say something," she begins, her hands clasped tightly. "That day in your driveway, I let my assumptions control my actions. I was wrong, and I'm sorry." John looks at her for a moment, his expression unreadable. Finally, he says, "It's not easy to admit when we've failed, but what matters is what we do next. Are you ready to take that next step?" Karen nods, determination clear in her eyes. "Yes, Chief. I want to make this right, not just for you but for the community. In the following weeks, Karen dives headfirst into the outreach initiatives John has championed. She takes on a visible role in programs aimed at building trust and understanding, often sharing her story as an example of how biases can lead to harmful decisions. At a local high school workshop, she recounts her experience with John's arrest. I thought I was protecting the community, she tells the students, her voice filled with emotion. But in truth, I was letting my fears dictate my actions. That's not what this badge stands for, and it's not who I want to be. Karen's sincerity begins to resonate, both within the department and the community. She mentors younger officers, emphasizing the importance of de-escalation and empathy. Despite facing skepticism and hostility from some residents, she perseveres, understanding that trust must be earned through consistent actions. John observes Karen's transformation with quiet approval. Her efforts inspire him to publicly acknowledge her growth during a department meeting. Officer Daniels has taken responsibility for her actions and is working tirelessly to rebuild trust. That's the kind of leadership we need, he says, his words met with a mix of applause and murmurs. As Karen continues to bridge divides, a deeper respect forms between her and John. They find themselves collaborating on outreach events, with Karen gradually becoming a trusted voice in the community. By the time the department organizes a town hall meeting, Karen is ready to face the public fully. John introduces her with confidence, signaling a turning point in their partnership. Karen steps forward, addressing the gathered residents. 6 months ago, I made a mistake that hurt many of you, and I've spent every day since working to make amends. I know words alone aren't enough, but I hope my actions have shown my commitment to doing better, for this department and for all of you. Her heartfelt apology is met with cautious applause, marking the beginning of a fragile but hopeful reconciliation. Together, she and John plant the seeds of a stronger community, setting the stage for the next chapter in their journey toward unity and understanding. Karen Daniels faced an uphill battle as she tried to rebuild trust within the community. Public backlash against her actions was intense, with protests outside the police department and angry letters demanding her resignation. Rather than shy away, Karen chose to confront the criticism head-on. Her first step was visiting John Carter's family in person. It was a difficult moment, standing on the same driveway where she had once placed John in handcuffs. John's wife opened the door, her expression guarded. I don't think you're welcome here, Officer Daniels, she said coldly. Karen nodded, her voice steady but soft. I understand, but I'm here to apologize. To your family and to you, Mr. Carter, she said, looking over at John, who had joined his wife in the doorway. John crossed his arms, studying her carefully. Apologies are words, he said. I'm here. What are you going to do to fix this? Karen didn't flinch. I'm here to start with this, admitting I was wrong, and I'm going to spend every day proving it with my actions. This personal moment was a turning point, but Karen knew it was only the beginning. Over the next few weeks, she poured herself into the community outreach initiatives John had introduced. She led workshops on understanding implicit bias, often sharing her own story as an example of how assumptions can lead to catastrophic mistakes. During one session with local high school students, she explained how her split-second judgments during John's arrest revealed her own blind spots. I thought I was doing my job, she told them, her voice cracking. But in reality, I was letting my personal biases dictate my actions. I'm standing here today because I refuse to let that define me, or this badge. The students, initially skeptical of her sincerity, began to ask questions, their curiosity gradually replacing their distrust. Karen also began mentoring younger officers in the department, focusing on de-escalation techniques and the importance of building rapport with the public. She made it a point to engage with the neighborhoods most affected by her actions, attending community meetings, and listening without defensiveness. It wasn't easy. Many people were openly hostile, and some refused to believe her intentions were genuine. Still, she persevered, leaning on John's guidance when the road felt too difficult. At one point, during a particularly heated community event, a resident shouted, "You don't belong here! We don't want you!" Karen stood firm, responding, "I understand how you feel, and I am here to earn your trust, not demand it." John, impressed by Karen's determination, decided to recognize her efforts publicly. At a press conference, he praised her work and highlighted her as an example of how law enforcement could change for the better. "Karen made a mistake," John said, his voice steady. "But she's also shown incredible courage in owning that mistake and working to correct it. That's the kind of leadership this department needs." While some remained skeptical, others began to see Karen in a new light. Slowly but surely, the community started to soften toward her, acknowledging that she was genuinely committed to making amends. The story reached its climax at a community celebration held 6 months after John Carter's appointment as chief of police. Hundreds gathered in the town square, a space that had once been a site of protests but now buzzed with an air of hope and possibility. The event was organized to showcase the department's progress under John's leadership, with speeches, workshops, and even a symbolic tree-planting ceremony to represent growth and unity. John stood at the podium, looking out at the crowd. His MAGA hat was perched proudly on his head, a silent symbol of his commitment to free expression. When the crowd quieted, he began his speech. His voice carrying both authority. 6 months ago, I stood on this same stage as someone wrongly arrested for simply wearing a hat. That moment could have divided us even further, but instead, it brought us here, together, to prove that unity is stronger than division. John went on to reflect on the challenges of reforming the department and rebuilding trust within the community. "Change is never easy," he said, pausing to let the words sink in. "But it's necessary, and it starts with all of us, not just as officers, but as neighbors, as friends, as members of the same community." His words drew cheers from the crowd, but he wasn't finished. "This hat," he continued, removing it and holding it in his hands, "is just a symbol. It's a part of who I am, but it doesn't define me. My actions do, and that's the message I want to leave with each of you. Let your actions define you. Let your actions define you." After John's speech, he invited Karen to the stage. It was a bold move. Some in the crowd still hadn't forgiven her, but John knew it was time for her to face the public fully. Karen stepped up hesitantly, gripping the edges of the podium as she began to speak. "6 months ago, I made a decision that I deeply regret." She started, her voice shaky but growing stronger. "That decision hurt a good man, his family, and this community. But it also taught me one of the most valuable lessons of my life. We're all capable of growth, and it's never too late to do the right thing." She spoke about her journey, the support she'd received from John, and her commitment to continuing her work in the community. By the end of her speech, the crowd was applauding, not everyone, but enough to show that her efforts were making a difference. The event concluded with John and Karen planting a tree together, a symbolic gesture that underscored their journey from conflict to collaboration. As they worked side by side, reporters snapped photos, capturing the moment that would soon go viral as a symbol of redemption and progress. Later that evening, John stood with his family, watching the footage of the event on the news. His son looked up at him, beaming with pride. "You did it, Dad," he said. John smiled, placing his arm around his son's shoulders. "We did it," he replied. The story closed with a final shot of the tree, standing tall and proud in the town square, a living testament to the power of second chances and the importance of unity.